All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Secure What Matters, Real-Time Data Protection with DSPM and DLP. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday afternoon. My name is Kristen, and I'm on the marketing team here at Aqueduct Technologies. I just want to note that today's call is being recorded. In today's session, we are joined by Keith Loftman, Enterprise Architect here at Aqueduct, and Fred Silverman, Channel Sales Engineer at Cyera. We want to keep this interactive, so if at any point you would like to ask a question, please type it in the chat or the Q&A box. We'll make sure to get those answered. Without further ado, Keith and Fred, the floor is yours if you'd like to introduce yourselves.
Great. Thanks, Christian. Hey, everyone. Fred Silverman, Channel SC here at Cyera. Certainly very excited to be speaking with everybody today. And the goal of today is to simply give folks an overview of Cyera and really give people a real good look in terms of what we could do via demo. So I'll be covering our DLP solution, along with Keith be covering our DSPM solution.
Thanks, Fred. Nice to meet everybody. Keith Loftman, Enterprise Architect at Aqueduct Technologies. Really part of the team that's focusing on, data and AI, and a core kind of, foundation of that stack is knowing what data you have, where it is, the sensitivity of it, the classification of it, and that's really where a tool like Cyera for us, and partnering with them helps to bring all that powerful insight to our customers. So looking forward to the demonstration today, and we'll kick it off with a couple slides here.
Awesome. Thanks, Keith. So the purpose here is to really get into the demo shortly, but we just wanted to cover just one slide just to set the stage. And I like this slide in particular because I think it really articulates that Cyera was built to solve real problems, right? I mean, security teams, they're constantly struggling with consistent visibility, right? Or control over their data, right? Especially now where data is spread across the cloud, SaaS, and on-prem. And most tools security teams are using are designed for a legacy era. With Cyera, everything starts by discovering where the sensitive data is and really who can access it and how it's being used. And that's really the foundation of our DSPM solution. It's fully agentless, it's cloud native, and it runs across your entire environment. But we don't stop there, right? What makes it even more powerful is that we layer on a real-time protection with our Omni DLP solution. And think of Omni DLP as a super AI like SOC agent that could work across your cloud, emails, your endpoint, and SaaS solutions, DLP solutions, leveraging your same policies, but providing you with better signals, filtering out all that noise, and giving you, again, much fewer false positives. Under the hood, we use these large language models to classify data and provide really deep context for both data that's at rest and both data that's in motion. So we understand when things look risky, even though it's not considered a textbook violation. All this posture and protection really comes together, as you're going to see shortly in the demo, in a single view, right? You get to see a dashboard that's really showing you where the risk is. It's giving you real actionable things to resolve. And you can really trace your sensitivity from end to end. And you can automate responses, again, through your existing tools that we'll show you shortly. So whether you're trying to meet compliance, reduce risks, or just get control over your data, you're not stitching 5 different products together, right? You can do it all in one place, just with Cyera. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to hand it over to Keith to kick us off for the DSPM demo.
Thanks, Fred. All right, let me share my screen here and hop off. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see my screen okay.
Yep, looks good.
So, guys, on the DSPM side, really what we're focusing on, is the foundation of where our data resides, what type of data it is. And when you log into Cyera for the first time, this is where you'll land. It's the dashboard overview. There are 2 different types of dashboards, SecOps and data and assets. And, really the difference between them is The SecOps dashboard is going to give you, the highlights, the overview of any of the critical data security issues, vulnerabilities in your environment, trending analysis. And we can see that, given what we're looking at right now. We can see, the amount of sensitive records with high risk. We can see our trending analysis. We can see open issues that we have out there, and we'll talk about what an issue is and how we can create it and basically alert on it. We show you the top identities with the access that they have, right? So you can understand at a glance your exposure risk that's out there. And we give you the top issues related to some of the actual policies that have been violated, as well as the data stores and the data classes that are kind of the heavy hitters, if you will. And we're going to talk about issues and data stores and data classes as part of this demo. But think of this dashboard as kind of the high-level overview of the risks in your environment as we've scanned and aggregated them. If we look at the data and assets dashboard, this is a little bit more of a tactical overview. All right, this is going to give you the breakdown and the data assets across your entire data estate. And that's cloud, on-prem, Microsoft 365, SaaS, application focus. Cyera has a ton of out-of-the-box deployments that we're going to show you here in a second to effectively populate and scan your environment for data stores. So looking at these data stores, we can again look at the breakdown, right, in terms of what we have in our environment. This is everything from EC2 instances to S3 buckets to on-prem NAS shares, what have you. We can look at the data store trends, right? We can look at our scan coverage, so we can identify, are we scanning everything in the environment? Maybe some things are not covered, right? Maybe some things are covered. How are we doing from basically an inventory perspective of what we're scanning and capturing? The goal really is for you to protect kind of everything in your data estate. We recognize that, not everybody, wants to do that, or you may think you kind of have a good handle on the data stores that, have sensitive data and others that don't. But realistically, if you take kind of the mindset of capturing and scanning everything, you'll get what you don't know. And that's sometimes the most powerful aspect of a solution like this is we'll show you, information and classification of data that you may not even know is out there in your environment, whether it's a different region, whether it's a different account, what have you. So this really breaks down that tactical measure of what do I have in my environment. We're going to touch upon data classes. Data classes are effectively the data types that Cyera is looking for. Now, they're out of the box, hundreds of these out of the box classifications. You have the ability to create your own, and I'll kind of point up on what that is. But really what I like to point out here is this concept of learned data classes. This is a massive differentiator for Cyera in the marketplace, right? And really what this is when Cyera scans and investigates the piece of data, it's not just simply applying regex pattern matching or some of the basics like many of the solutions out there today do. It is context aware. It is reading that data. It is understanding the proximity of words and values and all the context around that particular piece of information. It is leveraging its own AI and machine learning algorithms to effectively understand what it's looking at. And I'll give you an example. You could be an insurance company and you could have a policy ID, but that data format might actually be in the same format as a social security number, right? And when that happens, how do you really weed out what's a false positive? How do you understand what's a social security number versus what's a policy ID number? It's very tough and difficult to do that with simple regex pattern matching. Cyera and the capabilities that it brings to the market, again, with its context awareness and being able to identify that and understand kind of where this piece of information resides in the data that it's scanning, it's actually going to be able to go out there and say, hey, this is a policy ID. This is not a social security number. Therefore, I'm going to create my own data classifier automatically, and I'm going to start labeling the information in the documents and the data stores that I see in the environment that match this, all with the proximity awareness and context awareness around it, to give you a real good indication of the fact that this is an insurance policy with a high degree of confidence. So that's really powerful. One of the powerful features of Cyera. It's honestly one of the things that kind of got me excited about it initially, and we're gonna look at this a little bit more in depth when we get through to the data side of this. So you're probably asking, this is great. I see a lot of data. How does this get populated? Well, let's go through that. Cyera onboards a deployment. Okay, and a deployment is really just a couple minutes of connecting, one of the cloud providers, on-prem, SaaS and application connectors that Cyera has in its marketplace. This is constantly evolving. So what you see today here is not an exhaustive list. It will constantly change, evolve, and only more things will get added to it. But onboarding is effectively pointing it to your cloud account or pointing it to your SaaS application and letting it discover the number of accounts that are in that. So what's the designation between deployment and accounts? I'll give you another example. Let's say I have an Azure tenant that I'm onboarding, but I have 10 subscriptions in that tenant. The deployment is going to onboard the tenant and the awareness around those subscriptions. But now the accounts is going to actually list all the different subscriptions that might be available to scan. And this is where you have the ability now to pick and choose, accounts and the data stores associated with those accounts, right, that are discovered. So this is the discovery process, right? This takes anywhere from a couple hours, or more, depending upon the size of the environment. And what you're left with is relatively within a few hours, a couple of minutes of the deployment, a couple hours maybe for the discovery, you are now presented with all of your data stores. This is where the actual data resides. And as you can see from this example, we've got everything from OneDrive accounts to S3 buckets to EC2 servers, all the way down to, Snowflake, Azure files, what have you. There's a very exhaustive list of what's supported for scanning capabilities. And this is where you can start to pick and choose what particular data stores you want to scan. Again, I think usually, what I like to kind of recommend is scan everything in the environment because, unless you have a really good handle on what this data is, usually 9 times out of 10, I'm always seeing customers surprised by seeing that they have sensitive data in maybe a OneDrive or an RDS database that they don't expect to have that data. That's powerful information right then and there, in my opinion. So we've got the data populated, and we can click on some of it to dig into it further. And when we do that, we're basically ending up at this data discovery phase over here. Now, this we're looking at a specific bucket, but if I click on to the data in general and I clear this filter, you can see all the different data classes that Cyera has uncovered. Okay. These data classes are a combination of out-of-the-box ones, right? Like Social Security number. They are a combination of ones that you can create through data customization wizards. And they're also inclusive of those learned classifiers. So again, right here, you're seeing a list of loan ID. That's not an out-of-the-box one from Cyera. That's something where it looked at the data that I have running out there in S3 bucket, OneDrive, what have you, and it identified that I'm seeing this repeatable pattern. I'm understanding the proximity of the words and the information and the metadata around it. And I've created a classifier called loan ID. And so therefore, I can now apply this classifier within my environment, specific to your environment, to anything going forward. And that's pretty powerful, right? Because this is really where some of the false positives get reduced, where people try to create regex patterns, and it just doesn't kind of work, to the form of fashion that they would like. So I think this is a wonderful feature to take a look at. And not only do we have the ability to have the learned classifiers, but as an example, we've got these topics up here. And these topics, think of them as, kind of the popular groupings or some of the heavy hitters or low-hanging fruit, however you want to describe it. But, PII, for example, I look at that and I kind of say, okay, this is probably something that a lot of people are going to want to be looking at. So I can just click this topic. It will arrange and organize the 22 data classes that fall into that category. There's more. These are just the ones that it's found in my environment. And that allows you to basically hone in on identifiable data that might be out there, and identifiable data that when I click on it and I look at it, now I can see I found Social Security number. I found this many records across the entire environment. Oh, and hey, look at this. This is where I can find the distribution. I've got Social Security information in OneDrives. I've got it in S3 buckets. I've got it on an EC2 instance. I mean, that's pretty powerful, right? Some of this stuff you probably don't want to have this type of data on. So even, as a preventative measure from any cyber attack, knowing where this data is and being able to identify, hey, this shouldn't be sitting on this test VM. Let's go talk to the application owner and clean this up is powerful, not only for IT admins and CISOs, but also for application owners as they, evolve their product and their business unit. We also see the issues that exist. And we're going to dig into these issues. These are based upon policies, but effectively, these are the violations that have occurred in your environment. And so we're going to bubble those up for you, and we're going to put a severity onto them so that you can dig into it and understand what it is you have to go fix, and even apply some automated remediation in some cases. Okay. Now, that's great for the data in terms of where it is, and the sensitivity and the classification of it. But now I want to add to it, who has access to this data? So identities becomes the second critical element that Cyera marries together and maps from a data perspective as well as who has access to it. So now I can kind of open up my exposure, and my attack surface and understand who out there can see this information that's been classified as sensitive. Maybe it's by design, but maybe it's not, right? So if we look at identities, now that we have all the data classified, we're going to be able to go through and see any problems or areas of concern that we might need to dig into. You get the same topics up here, right, for some of the heavy hitters. And if I click on something like external identities, right, I'll start seeing all of these different identities that are external to my organization and what access they have, as well as any issues that may pop up in the data categories. So as you can see down here, I've been a bad person and I shared this file with somebody that maybe I shouldn't have. So I'm going to look into that and understand what it is this information is telling me. And it's saying that I've got a document in a OneDrive that I've shared with an external user. And maybe that's no big deal. Maybe that happens all the time in your environment. But as part of that, you may want to understand, hey, this document has something proprietary, confidential, restricted that you don't want external users to be able to see. And in doing this and being able to discover and map upon this, I'm able to dig into the fact that here's the data store where this user has access. Here's the actual data types that are found in the documents that the user has access to. And here are the issues that are related to that access identity. In this particular case, hey, there's somebody who has access that's not explicitly allowed to in my organization. So let's talk about issues. All right. Now that we've got the data and we've mapped it with the identities that have access to the data, here's the power of Cyera. When we create a policy, the policy is basically go find something, and I'm trivializing this, but go find something, report on it, and I basically want to understand what the violation is. It's what I care about of data sensitivity in my environment, and you can apply remediation to it as well. Our policies, tons of ones out of the box, and they can align to specific frameworks. So if you care about CIS and that's what's governing, your compliance out there, you can see all the different policies that are enabled and out of the box, and you can create your own policies as well that would align to the framework. We can also group them by use case, and I like to usually use the use case side. So we'll click on this one as an example, mislabeled data. Now I created this policy right here. And when we talk about policies, we have the opportunity to create two different types of policies. One's a data security policy, and one is a sensitivity label policy. The data security policy, that's going to be something where we're focusing on the risks to the sensitive data and the identity access violations. Okay. The sensitivity label policy, this is pretty cool. This is where we start to blur the lines and we start to get into DLP functionality, which Fred's going to talk about here shortly. And we can align in this case with something like Purview, which is what I've created for the purposes of this demonstration. Okay. So if I look at this policy, I'll show it to you. Here's where you can define the items that you want to look for. Now mine's pretty basic, right? I'm saying, hey, if you see anything in Microsoft 365 that has identified as Social Security, NPI, or credit card number, I'm expecting that it has a Microsoft, a MIP label, an information protection label of AQ Tech Dev sensitive applied to it. Okay. If it doesn't, alert me and alert me with the severity of high, because that's how serious I am about this. I can also put remediation and automations into fixing that issue if it is alerted. That's critical because in the area of kind of, I'll say violations or vulnerabilities, we focus a lot on MTTR, mean time to resolution. And so understanding the data and mapping it back to the identities is great. But if I can kind of shrink the time it takes to fix that, that's really what the power is. And that's what these remediations and automations can do. And there's a variety of integrations that we can, work with out of the box. Everything from ticketing systems to, actual execution engines, if you will. So if we go back to this policy and we look at the fact that it has issues on it, we can see that I pop up again. And let's go take a look at what this issue is telling me. Well, already I can look at kind of the summary of everything that's involved. I can look at the actual data that has been classified and is causing the alert. And this is where the power comes in. So I can take a look at these pieces of information, Excel spreadsheets, PDFs, what have you. And if I scroll over to the right a little bit, you can see that this sensitivity label, this comes from Microsoft, right? So again, my policy is if it's not labeled, tell me about it. And even if it is labeled, let's make sure that label is correct. And this is pretty cool because if it doesn't have a label, that makes sense. Okay, I want to go apply one. But let's say somebody is using MIP labels out there and they do like what's happened here where it's been labeled incorrectly. They think that there's no big deal. There's nothing, sensitive in this information. But Cyera comes around and they scan for it and they disagree. So we're going to alert you to basically say, hey, it's labeled, but it's labeled as personal. And the data that's in here is not personal data. You want to protect it. So now what do I do? Well, with this particular policy, and many other policies, I can now click on an individual file. I can click on all of them, whatever it is that you want to operate on. And I have the ability now to do a couple things. First and foremost, I can actually integrate with Purview, which this is, and I can apply and change the sensitivity label to where I think it should be. Right? Mean time to resolution, I shrink that down by having somebody do those changes here in Cyera. I can create a Jira ticket. I can send it off to ServiceNow integrations. I can do all these other types of notifications depending upon how you want to be notified. Sky's the limit here. So the power of being able to apply a sensitivity label from the discovery augments the DLP engine. And that's where I'm going to hand it over to Fred now to kind of show you what that looks like. But just remember that from a DSPM perspective, being able to tie together the data, the identity, and then focusing on that risk and remediation aspect to lower the mean time to resolution, that's the powerful part of what Cyera brings. And, this is a quick demo, but we can certainly get into it deeper and perform a much more detailed demo and even POVs for those that kind of want to see what their data estate looks like in their environment. However, Fred, I'll turn it over to you now, and you can kind of pick up where I'm leaving off in terms of the DLP integrations.
Awesome. Will do. Thank you, Keith. Let me go ahead and just share my screen. But yeah, as Keith said, like we'll be more than happy to follow up with the folks on the call for a deeper dive demo, of course. And even better, we could get started in your environment. We could test it out. We could show you, some visibility in terms of things that you might not know about. We can do that very, very quickly. But with that said, let's jump into the DLP portion of it, right? So when we speak to customers, more often than not, about their DLP solution, we do hear that customers are struggling with their DLP solutions, right? Simply because they're getting flooded with various alerts, right? They're constantly tuning policies, and unfortunately, things are still getting through, right? And we know that traditional, DLP solutions again create that noise. And where Omni DLP really wants to help out is to filter the noise, right? And really focus in on what matters the most. And what's interesting here is that Omni DLP is not really going to replace your existing DLP solution. We're going to simply integrate with what you have. So within 5 minutes, we're going to integrate with what you're using for DLP for cloud, email, endpoint, or SaaS. And then what we'll show you in the demo is we'll centralize these policies that you have. We'll ingest all the alerts, and we'll layer on real context inside your DLP environment. So how do we do that? Essentially, think of Omni DLP as your AI brain, if you will. Think of it as like a super SOC agent. Instead of having an army of SOC agents analyze the alerts, right? The Omni DLP will replace hundreds of SOC agents to really dig in and find out what's happening. And it does this through 3 critical lenses, right? So the first lens is business context. So Omni DLP would understand what industry you're in, what business you're in, understands, what risk is associated with that industry or business, and surface the sensitivity contextualized through a business lens, right? The next would be certainly data classification, right? And this is where things really gets interesting, is that this goes way beyond what regex pattern matching would be, because Omni inherits the full data classification of your DSP solution. So whether it's PII data, source code data, your proprietary IP data, Omni DLP knows the type of data and it's aware of how sensitive it is. And then we layer in user identity, right? So, we understand the users that's accessing the file, right? And we know if not just a user clicks something, right? I don't know how great that would be, but we can tell you if this user that clicked the thing is an intern or is an engineer, or perhaps his termination date is later today, right? We take all of that into consideration. We look at this, and through a lens, are they acting in line with their role? And if they're not, we certainly want to raise the alert. So one of the things that we do as well, and we'll show you in the demo, is that we leverage what we're seeing with your existing policies. We see how they're being enforced, right, in your DLP environment. And then we use AI, again, our AI brain, to give you suggested policies that would provide you a true positive enforcement of 95% or greater, which might sound high in DLP, but it's something we can absolutely provide, and we can, show that in the demo. So this is how we reduced, 10,000 false positive alerts from legacy tools like DLP and regex that, quite frankly, they simply can't keep up. So let's just dig in just to a few examples of this, right? So if we go to the alert screen here, right? So certainly we want to be able to see all the alerts that we have in the environment that's being served up in our DLP solution, right? There's over 1,000 alerts here, and maybe that's common for a large environment, and that's a lot. It's a lot of alerts to sort through. I could simply go in here, I could just hit the severity tab and just show me the 5 or 8 different critical alerts that's really meaningful that I really should focus my time and energy on. Now I'm going to pick on one alert just for the sake of time. And here's one alert where the customer data is exposed by Anna, right? So if we dig in a little bit, we know that this alert originally came in through Microsoft Purview as a low, okay, which is good. Purview did catch it, but Omni DLP raised the criticality to critical, right? Saying, no, this is not a low alert, this is a critical alert. And here's why, right? Well, first off, the user, Anna, is attempting to send out an Excel file containing customer contact information, retaining fees, payment history, right? Very, let's just say, sensitive client material, information, payment history, what have you. And there's a few things here that's alarming to us. Certainly, the information is sensitive in nature. Second, the file is called holiday gift. So the name of the file does not represent the actual data. Something's being obfuscated here. Something's trying to get through. We certainly call that out. But we also are saying that, Anna's going to be flagged for termination, right, in the system. So on her way out, she's attempting to send out confidential information. Again, because we understand the sensitivity, the user, right, we can bring it all together and provide that deep, rich context. So the next thing too, I quickly want to show you here is issues, and issues is really more on the behavioral side, right? Because at the end of the day, we want to train our end users for best practices on usage, right? And I think this one example is interesting, like ChatGPT, because we are integrated again with the endpoint. We see the destination. We know the destination is ChatGPT, and we know the users that are uploading documents to ChatGPT. And, maybe it makes sense that IT is uploading technical information to ChatGPT and doing analysis, and that makes sense, okay? But why is sales putting intellectual property into, ChatGPT? Well, maybe that's not great, right? So that could be more of a behavioral thing. We want to educate our end users as to, best practices and whatnot. So certainly we could, leverage this to do just that. The next piece too, I just quickly want to cover here is, what we talk about policies, right? So this is where essentially we really want to understand like what's happening in the environment. So we have two types of policies. We have the collection policy, really for us, just casts a very large net. We really want to see, what's happening in the environment, right? We want to monitor all web traffic. We want to find, any password usage, really provide greater visibility, right? And then if we look at the enforcement side, we see how well these policies that we have in the environment are really being enforced. So if I look at just the first alert here for Purview for PII sharing, its true positive is about 20%. That means 80% of it is getting through, right? It's not being enforced effectively, right? Which is not great. And unfortunately, that's how most DLP solutions are with their policies. So this is where we really want to help, right? We could offer our customers our AI suggested policies, again, because of that continuous ingesting of the alerts, learning in the environment, using our AI brain to do analysis. We could serve up policies that we'll say will give a true positive 95% positive rating, right? And then customers could just essentially use this rule and integrate that in their existing environment and whatnot. Maybe one of the last things too I quickly want to cover is users. So because again we understand like who the users are, what they're doing with the data, right? We can flag users are, for any type of risky behavior, right? So here we have a user named Robert, and Robert, he has access to highly sensitive technical and manufacturing data, including product designs, security specifications, right? All kinds of things. The thing of it is, because we could go back and ingest all the alerts for the past 30 days, we have a really good, I want to say, timeline of Robert and what alerts that he's been tripping over the past 30 days. Maybe this is an insider risk type situation. We want to understand the blast radius. We could certainly look at his usage over the past 30 days and see what Robert's been doing. We don't have to wait certainly the 30 days. We could start looking at him sooner. We could flag him as a high risk user, so this way the system prompts us a bit more early as Robert starts doing things in the environment. And where this really comes together too is that we could click on show. All right, so Robert might be an insider threat here, perhaps. I want to see all the sensitive data Robert has access to, and I can just simply click on this link here, and essentially what that's going to do is show me all the access of sensitive files that Robert has in the environment, right? So I can see in one view of everything he has access to for the blast radius to really dig into that investigation. So I know this was kind of a quick overview, guys, of the Omni DLP, but just to kind of recap, I mean, Omni's really here to, help. We'll give you a really fast time to value because we're not necessarily deploying hardware. We're not, we're working with your existing system. We're connecting the API within a matter of minutes. We can give you really fast time to value. There's no rip and replace. We're really working with what you have right now. And at the end of the day, we're gonna block out all the noise and just focus in on what really matters and provide you very actionable and policies. So this really isn't a DLP 2.0, but this is an intelligent AI brain that works and makes your current tools better. So with that said, I know that was a bit quick, but we did want to give you a high-level overview. I guess, Christian, I'll hand it over to you to see perhaps if there are any questions out there we could help answer or things like that.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. That was great. We did have one question come through. This one says, we know we have sensitive data everywhere. How can Cyera help us actually do something about it, not just inventory it?
I can take that one. Great question. So that's kind of where we talked about this a little bit towards the end on the risk and remediation side. Cyera doesn't just kind of show you where the data is. We'll show you what's at risk, and that's through the policies and issues. So we're going to give you the ability to not only report on where the data is and get that inventory, but by applying, sensitivity labels, tagging, sending and automating ticketing systems and the integrations, we're really going to give you the remediations that you saw in the demo to shrink that mean time to resolution. And that's kind of ends up being the difference between just a list of inventory, and assets and a real risk reduction engine.
Great. Thank you for that. And then one other question has come through. How is Cyera different from the DLP tools we already have that alert too much and block too little?
Sure, that's a great question, Christian. Thank you. So yeah, like we're saying, like legacy DLP tools just by nature are just very noisy and they simply lack context, right? So Cyera, we're trying to really flip that, right? Where we build a map first on what is the data, how it's being used, right? And we can then correlate that with who touches the data and then layer on enforcement on top of it. And it really gives our customers smarter controls, resulting into fewer false positive, with a very unified visibility across their entire DLP environment. I know like we're over though, guys, just real quick. I just wanted to spend just a quick minute, if you don't mind. Like I know we did advertise in the in the webinar that we have a new product called AI Guardian, and it's really to help our customers get a good handle on how to secure AI. And I just want to quickly show you, what that looks like quickly. And then, we could certainly follow up with you guys at a future session for sure. But the long and short of it is that, Cyera, we now have the ability to scan your entire environment to see what AI is running, whether it being public AI tools like ChatGPT or Gemini or what have you. We could also report on custom AI, Gen AI tools like if someone has spun up a homebrew chatbot, we could report on that, right? We could also report on embedded AI like Agent Force or Copilot and things like that. And as you see here, we could scan all of the AI instances in your environment, and we could really drill down and just like give you really good information just in terms of like how the AI is being used, what data stores, what sensitive data is being served up into it. Don't want to spend a whole lot of time here, guys, but again, just wanted to give you a little sneak peek. And if there's interest, I'm more than happy to give you a full session on how, we can help customers secure their AI implementations.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much, Keith and Fred, for such a great conversation. And thank you all for spending your afternoon with us and bringing thoughtful questions to our hosts. We really appreciate all that engagement. I will be sending a follow-up email shortly with today's recording. If you're interested in taking this a step further, we'd be happy to set up a deeper hands-on demo and walk through what a POV could look like in your own environment. And as promised, we'll also be sending along a $25 gift card to enjoy lunch as a thank you for joining us today. And if there are any questions that come to mind after we wrap up, feel free to send them to me, and I'll make sure that Keith and Fred can receive them on their end, get them answered for you. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, guys.